They poured wine over her in the middle of the night at the party, and the whole room laughed. No one helped. No one said a word. And Seraphina Vale stood there, drenched, trembling, before hundreds of people who knew her father's name, the man murdered in what the city called an accident. But that night, someone walked into the room, a man whom even the most powerful criminals wouldn't dare look directly at. And he looked directly at her. If you're reading this story, please like and comment the name of the city you're reading in so I know how far my story has progressed. Don't miss the ending, where everything changes forever. The rain came down hard over Valmera the night everything broke open. Not the gentle kind of rain that softens things, the kind that punishes. It hammered the stone facades of the old financial district, flooded the gutters along Marchetti Boulevard, and turned the harbor into a black churning mess that smelled of salt and diesel and something older than both. The city had a way of doing that, dressing its violence in weather, making it seem natural, inevitable, like the flooding and the bodies and the silence afterward were all just part of the same season. Seraphina Vale stood in the employees' entrance of the Hotel Laurent and told herself she didn't feel anything. She was good at that. She'd had 3 years of practice. The catering uniform was 2 sizes too large across the shoulders and cinched poorly at the waist with a safety pin she'd found in the break room. Her hair was pulled back tight enough that her temples ached. She'd done her makeup the way she always did for these jobs. Muted, invisible, designed to make no impression whatsoever. To move through rooms of powerful people like furniture, like air, like nothing that deserved looking at. That was the point. The Laurent Charity Gala was the event of the season, which in Valmera meant it was the event of the criminal year. Every legitimate billionaire in the Eastern Corridor came to these things because they had to, because the gala was where alliances were sealed and favors were traded and enemies were measured across the rim of a champagne flute. And where the legitimate billionaires went, so went the men who supplied their silence, politicians, judges, and the syndicate bosses who kept the whole architecture from collapsing. Her supervisor, a thin, nervous man named Reeves who sweat through his collar even in January, gave her the same instructions he gave every new hire before gala night. Eyes down, keep moving. You don't hear anything. You don't remember anything. You fill the glass when it's empty, and you disappear when it isn't. Seraphina nodded. She already knew how to disappear. The ballroom was enormous. 3 stories of black marble and gilt molding and chandeliers that cost more to insure than the building around them. Roughly 400 guests moved through the space in clusters, the women draped in gowns that gleamed under the lighting, the men in suits that probably cost more than her rent. The orchestra was tucked near the north wall, playing something that cost a lot of money to make sound effortless. White-gloved waitstaff circulated with trays of champagne and small, architecturally perfect food. Everything about the room communicated the same thing. You belong here or you don't, and everyone knows which is which. Seraphina moved through it with her tray and said nothing. She had worked 4 of these gala events in the past 18 months. She had learned the geography of the ballroom, which clusters of guests stayed anchored to the bar, which ones drifted, which corners offered cover when a supervisor was watching. She had learned to make herself forgettable, even in motion, to keep her spine loose and her face blank, and her eyes cast slightly down in a way that suggested deference without specifically inviting cruelty. Usually, it worked. She was refilling glasses near the east column when she heard the voice. "My God, is that actually Sarah?" The voice was designed to carry. She recognized that even before she recognized whose it was, the volume calibrated to hit surrounding ears without looking like it was trying to, the slight musical lilt that turned cruelty into performance. "Vivienne." Seraphina didn't turn around. She kept her eyes on the champagne glass in front of her, on the pale gold of the wine rising toward the rim. She kept her hand steady. She breathed through her nose slowly and thought about nothing, about the numbers she needed for rent, about the back door, about the distance from where she was standing to the service corridor. "It is," Vivienne continued, moving closer. "Seraphina Vale, waiting tables. How absolutely perfect." The group around Vivienne laughed. That particular sound of people who laugh, not because something is funny, but because it is safe to. Seraphina set down the bottle carefully and turned around. Vivienne Ashby DuPont. She'd taken her stepfather's second surname now, added it to her own like a trophy. stood in a column of ivory silk that probably took a team of people 6 months to finish. Her dark hair was swept up professionally. Her face was perfect in the way of things that require constant maintenance. She was 26, 2 years older than Seraphina, and she had spent most of those 26 years being handed things. She'd gotten the house. She'd gotten the assets. She'd gotten the reputation. The only thing she hadn't been able to fully take was whatever it was that other people saw when they looked at Seraphina, some quality that Vivian had never managed to acquire or destroy, and that was why the cruelty kept coming. Because Vivian didn't just want to win, she needed Seraphina erased. "You look well," Vivian said, looking at her like she was checking. "Thank you." Seraphina kept her voice flat. "The uniform is interesting. Is that your size, or are they just not providing proper fitting these days? Standards really have dropped." More laughter. The group had grown. People drifting over the way they always do when the temperature of a nearby conversation changes, drawn by the possibility of spectacle. Seraphina counted 8 people in her peripheral vision. She kept her eyes on Vivian. "Excuse me," she said, and moved to go. Vivian stepped sideways. "Where are you going?" "I'm not finished." The smile had thinned into something that wasn't really a smile anymore. "We haven't seen each other in almost 2 years. I want to catch up." "There's nothing to catch up on." "Of course there is. You've been busy, haven't you? Mira told me you were working at that dreadful bar on Corrigan Street, and before that you were somewhere in the Midlands doing, what was it, data entry? Very industrious." Vivian tilted her head. "You look tired, Sarah." "I'm working." "So you are." Vivian glanced at the tray, at the cheap watch on Seraphina's wrist, at the safety pin cinching her jacket. She took in all of it slowly and deliberately, making sure everyone watching saw her doing it. "Your father would be horrified." The words hit like they were designed to. Seraphina felt her jaw lock. "Don't." "Don't what? Tell the truth?" Vivian shrugged lightly. "He spent his entire life building something. And then you just fell apart. Became a liability. All those rumors, all that business with the police, the money that went missing from his accounts before he even passed, you know exactly what happened to that money." The air shifted. Vivian's expression didn't flicker, which was how Seraphina knew she'd landed something real. A flicker would have been instinctive. The stillness was controlled. "That's a very serious accusation," Vivian said, voice dropping just low enough to seem reasonable. "It's not an accusation, it's a fact, and we both know it." For a moment, just a moment, something genuine moved across Vivian's face. Not guilt. Closer to the cold calculation of a person deciding how much pressure was safe to apply right now. Then someone from the circle murmured something Seraphina couldn't catch, and Vivian's smile came back, and the performance resumed. "Be careful what you say in rooms like this," Vivian said pleasantly. "People remember. And you've already got such a complicated reputation." She paused. "How is the—" She made a vague gesture toward Seraphina's wrist. "Everything? The problems you were having? I do worry." The implication was clean and surgical. Seraphina felt the looks that followed it, the slight lean of interested ears, the careful stillness of people cataloging new information. Vivian had spent 3 years systematically seeding stories through Valmera's social infrastructure. That Seraphina was unstable, that she had a history with substances, that the deterioration after her father's death wasn't grief, but something uglier. None of it was true. All of it had stuck. "I'm fine," Seraphina said. "Of course you are." Vivian reached out and very deliberately adjusted the collar of Seraphina's jacket, smoothing it in a gesture that managed to be both condescending and intimate. "You always say that." Seraphina stepped back. Vivian's hand moved faster than she expected. Not adjusting this time, but gripping, fingers closing around her wrist hard enough to feel it. Someone handed Vivian a champagne glass. Seraphina realized what was happening about half a second too late. The champagne came down across her chest and shoulder in one smooth, deliberate motion. Not a spill. A pour. Cold and immediate and soaking instantly through the thin fabric of the jacket, through her shirt beneath, across her skin. The gasp from the surrounding circle was too theatrical to be real. Some people covered their mouths. Someone was already filming. Seraphina stood completely still. She understood what this was. This was the moment Vivian had been building toward. The whole encounter was architecture. The public recognition, the slow escalation, the false intimacy of adjusting her collar, all of it designed to get to this: a room full of witnesses and a clear visual record of Seraphina humiliated, dripping, less than. "Oh," Vivian said, hand over her mouth in theatrical horror. "I'm so sorry. How clumsy of me." She wasn't remotely sorry. The laughter started soft and spread. Not everyone's. Some people looked uncomfortable, turned away, found reasons to be somewhere else, but enough that the sound was real and undeniable and landed somewhere in Seraphina's chest like a stone dropped from a height. "Someone should warn the other guests," Vivian said to the woman beside her, just loud enough. "Keep your bags close." Someone in the circle actually repeated it. "Watch your jewelry." Another voice added something else that got swallowed by the ambient noise of the room, but sparked more laughter. Seraphina felt her face go hot. She hated that. Hated the betrayal of her own body, the way shame was physical before it was emotional, heat and moisture and a tightening at the back of her throat she was desperately controlling. She needed to leave. She needed to get to the service corridor and get through this shift and get out of this city someday, some way, before Vivian managed to destroy what was left of her. But Vivian was still holding her wrist. "Let go," Seraphina said. "Don't you want to say something?" Vivian's voice was theatrical now, performed for the audience surrounding them. She pulled Seraphina's arm toward the staircase, toward the center of the room, beneath the grand chandelier where the light hit everything and everywhere was visible, and there was no cover, no shadow, no corner to retreat to. They were at the base of the staircase now. The chandelier above them was enormous. 3 tiers of crystal and gold that threw fractured light across the marble floor. 400 people had noticed. The orchestra thinned out and then stopped. Vivian raised her voice. "Tell everyone who you really are." The ballroom went almost completely silent. Seraphina could hear her own breathing. She could feel the stairs physically, the weight of collective attention pressing against her skin. Vivian was still holding her wrist. Security was moving in their direction. Someone with a camera had pushed closer. She thought about her father, about the morning she'd found him, and called the ambulance and stood on the lawn in the winter cold in her pajamas while the neighbors watched from their windows. About the months after, when Celeste and Vivian had moved through the estate like they'd always owned it, when documents she didn't understand transferred everything away, when people she had known her entire life stopped returning her calls. About the years after that, the jobs, the cheap apartments, the slow erosion of herself that she had convinced herself was adaptation, survival, practical adjustment to reality. She thought about all of it in the space of about 2 seconds. "I'm nobody," she said. Her voice was barely audible, but the room was quiet enough that it carried. Vivian let go of her wrist. Satisfaction moved across her face in a wave, clean, unmistakable, the expression of a person who has gotten exactly what they wanted. Then the ballroom doors opened. Nobody announced it. No one saw it coming. One moment, the room was a 400-person audience organized around Seraphina's humiliation, and then the temperature changed in a way that was purely physical, a collective shift in posture, a redistribution of attention so sudden and total it was almost like a sound. Seraphina didn't understand what had happened at first. She was still standing at the base of the staircase, soaked, burning with shame, and then she realized that nobody was looking at her anymore. They were looking at the door. Damien Moretti came in from the rain. He was tall, not in a way that seemed designed for effect, but the kind of height that came with a physical presence so dense it reorganized the space around it. The black suit was precise without being decorative. No pocket square, no flourish. The kind of tailoring that had no interest in being admired. Rainwater glistened across his shoulders and in his dark hair, and he had not bothered to shake it off. His face was in its early 40s, sharp-boned, carrying the kind of weight that accumulates rather than arrives. 2 men came in behind him. Seraphina barely registered them. Nobody in the room registered them. When Damien Moretti entered a room, the surrounding people ceased to function as individuals and became something more like landscape. She had heard his name, of course. Everyone in Valmera had heard his name, but she had never seen him, and the name had always felt like the kind of thing that existed in a different layer of the city's reality than the one she moved through. A name for politicians to worry about, for crime reporters to whisper, for the men in expensive suits at these very galas to exchange glances over. She had not expected to feel afraid in an animal way, the way you feel afraid of weather. Damien's eyes swept the ballroom in a single pass. The pass stopped on her. Seraphina did not breathe. He had seen her. She understood this instinctively. Not the general registration of a person in a scene, but genuine focused attention, the kind that costs something in the person doing it. She was dripping champagne in a too large catering jacket at the base of a staircase with tears she was refusing to release burning behind her eyes. And Damien Moretti, the most feared man in the Eastern syndicates, was looking directly at her. She looked away first. She heard the footsteps crossing the marble floor, and she was absolutely certain they were going somewhere else, toward the bar, toward the politician who was already moving forward with his hand extended, toward Celeste, who had appeared at the edge of the circle with a practiced social smile climbing her face. The footsteps stopped in front of her. Seraphina looked up. He was close enough that she caught the smell of him, rain and smoke and something deeper underneath, whiskey and something she couldn't name, a smell that felt like cold rooms and old wood and the specific gravity of someone who had made too many decisions. Her chin was down. She realized that. His hand moved, 2 fingers, under her jaw, not grabbing, not forcing, just lifting, a pressure so controlled it was almost clinical. Her face came up. She was looking at him. His eyes were gray. She hadn't expected gray. They were very still. "Who touched you?" he said. His voice was quiet. That was the most disturbing part. The room was near silent, and he spoke at what should have been a conversational volume, and somehow it reached every corner. Nobody answered him. The circle of spectators had become a circle of statues. Vivian found her voice first, which said something about her that was not good. "Mr. Moretti," a small forced laugh. "This is honestly just a bit of family drama. There's no need. I wasn't asking you." No heat in it, no anger that was performative. Just the flat statement of a fact. Her voice was not relevant to his question. The silence pressed down. Seraphina was still looking at him. She should have looked away again. Every instinct she'd spent 3 years developing said, "Look away. Make yourself small. Don't occupy space in the attention of dangerous people." But she couldn't do it. There was something in his face that she couldn't identify. Not tenderness, not pity, which she would have hated. Something older and more specific than either. "It doesn't matter," she said. She meant it to come out neutral. It came out like she was underwater. His eyes moved across her face, reading something in it that she wasn't aware she was showing. Then they moved briefly, very briefly, to Vivienne, to the champagne still dripping from Seraphina's jacket, to the circle of people who had watched. His expression didn't change. That was almost more frightening than if it had. He removed his jacket. It came off his shoulders in a single motion, and then it was around hers, heavy, warm, carrying that smell she still couldn't name. She grabbed the lapels instinctively because the weight would have pulled it loose and stood there holding his coat closed around herself, not understanding what was happening, not ready to understand it. He turned to face the room. 400 people stared back at him. "She belongs to me." The sentence moved through the ballroom like a physical force. Seraphina felt people flinch with it, felt the collective exhale of a room realizing that the rules of the last several minutes had all changed. The logic of the evening, the social calculus of cruelty and performance and audience, all of it collapsed in 3 words spoken at barely conversational volume. Vivian's face had gone the color of old paper. Celeste stepped forward from the edge of the circle with the careful expression of a woman who had survived 30 years of powerful men by reading rooms and moving correctly through them. "Mr. Moretti," her voice was steady, professionally modulated. "Surely we don't need to escalate this particular—" He looked at her, just looked. Celeste stopped mid-sentence. Whatever she saw in his face, Seraphina couldn't read it from her angle, but she watched its effect. It was enough. Celeste took 1 step backward. "She leaves with me," Damien said. "Not to anyone specifically, to the room." Anyone who has a problem with that can discuss it with my lawyers in the morning. A pause. Or not in the morning. Your choice. The security personnel who had been moving toward them had stopped. Seraphina saw one of them make deliberate eye contact with a colleague and then very carefully not move. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Damien's hand came to the small of her back, not gripping, just directing, a pressure that said this way. Seraphina moved. Her legs worked. She was still holding his jacket closed around her chest with both hands, and the champagne was soaking cold against her skin, and she was walking through 400 people who had parted like they were made of water. She could hear her own heartbeat. They moved across the ballroom floor under absolute silence, except for the soft sound of her heels and the rain still hammering the windows 3 stories above. She didn't look at anyone. She looked straight ahead. She was shaking, not from fear, or not only from fear, but from the specific physical exhaustion of a person whose body has been flooded with adrenaline it had nowhere to direct. At the edge of the room, just before the exit, she made one mistake. She looked back. Vivian was standing at the base of the staircase where she'd left her. The satisfaction was completely gone. What was left on her face was harder to name, something between fury and fear, a particular kind of helplessness that comes from having used all your ammunition and watched it evaporate. Celeste was beside her, already speaking quietly to someone with a phone, but it was the phone she noticed. The one still aimed at them, still recording, held by a woman in a green dress near the bar, who was tracking them all the way to the door with steady hands and an expression of pure fascination. That footage would be everywhere by morning. Seraphina turned away and walked through the door and out of the ballroom and into whatever had just begun. The car was a black SUV, armored by the weight and sound of it, parked in the service lane outside the employee entrance. One of Damien's men opened the rear door and she got in and sat down and sat there wrapped in a dead man's jacket, a monster's jacket, while the city moved past the tinted windows. Damien sat beside her. The men in front said nothing. Nobody spoke. She should have been terrified. She was, a little. But terror requires a belief that the current situation is worse than what preceded it, and 3 years of slow erasure had done something to her threshold that she hadn't yet fully calculated. After about 10 minutes, she said, "Where are we going?" "My home." "I didn't agree to that." "No," he said. She waited. He didn't add anything. "That's it? Just no?" "You're safer there than anywhere else in the city tonight." He was looking at the window. His profile was very still in the passing light. The amber of street lamps, the blue-white of a hotel sign, darkness between. "You can disagree. I'll have someone take you wherever you want to go after." "But," he turned slightly, "but the people in that room saw what just happened. Some of them will want to know what it means. A few of them will want to make sure it doesn't mean what they think." He paused. "Your stepsister was already on her phone." Seraphina thought about Vivian's face, the calculation in it. She looked at her own hands, still faintly trembling. "You don't know me," she said. "No." "Then why—" She stopped, started again. "Why did you do that?" He was quiet for long enough that she thought he wasn't going to answer. "Because I've seen that face before," he said. "The one you were wearing." "What face?" "The one people wear when they've decided nobody's coming." She didn't know what to do with that. She looked back out the window. The city moved past them, rain-soaked and glittering, full of its own terrible momentum. Valmera at night. The harbor lights reflected across black water. The lights of the old financial district like something indifferent and cold. The streets empty in ways that felt intentional. She was going to regret this. Whatever this was, she was going to regret it the way you regret walking through a door that locks behind you. But her chest was still wet with champagne, and her wrist still ached where Vivian had gripped it, and she was sitting in a warm car going somewhere dry. And for the first time in longer than she could accurately remember, nobody was laughing at her. She closed her eyes. The car moved through the rain. The estate was on the northern coast, set back from the water on a bluff, surrounded by walls that were clearly functional rather than decorative. They drove through 2 gates. The second required a code and biometric confirmation that Damien provided without looking away from his phone. The building itself was long and low and dark, built in the style of the previous century, all clean, severe lines and enormous windows that in the daylight would face the ocean. He showed her a room, third floor, east wing, a bed, an attached bathroom, windows that overlooked the water. The room was furnished sparsely and impersonally, the kind of space maintained for use rather than comfort, but the sheets were clean and there was a robe on the back of the bathroom door, and when she turned on the water, it ran hot almost immediately. He stood in the doorway. "There's clothing in the wardrobe," he said. "I keep supplies for—" He paused very briefly. "Various situations. It should be close to your size." "You keep women's clothes on hand?" "My associate keeps a supply for situations involving guests who weren't planning to stay." She looked at him. He looked back at her without any particular expression. "Nobody enters this room without your permission," he said. "Not staff, not my men, not me." That's an interesting thing to say. It's a house rule. She didn't know whether to believe him. She decided, in the way of a person who no longer had the energy to calibrate risk precisely, that she would believe him tonight and reassess in the morning. "Your phone," she said. "Can I use it to tell my supervisor I won't be finishing the shift?" He removed his phone from his jacket and held it out. She took it. His hand was very still. She couldn't help noticing, that there was a scar across his right palm, old and faded, the kind of thing that had healed so thoroughly it had become geography. She made the call standing near the window, looking at the ocean through the glass. Reeves answered on the second ring, and she told him there was a family emergency and she was sorry for the short notice. He said some things she mostly didn't hear. She thanked him and ended the call and turned back to the room. Damien was still in the doorway. "Your stepsister," he said. "Vivian Ashby DuPont." Something went cold in Seraphina's stomach. What about her? Her mother's foundation was one of the Gala's primary sponsors. He was very still as he spoke, and she realized that the stillness was a mode, that he was always like this, processing at a speed that didn't reach the surface. The Laurent family has a relationship with several members of the Gala's organizing committee, and the organizing committee has a relationship with a number of individuals I have been watching for approximately 3 years. She stared at him. "Why are you telling me this?" His gray eyes moved over her face. "Because you said something tonight," he said. "To your stepsister, before she spilled the champagne." A pause. "You told her you knew what happened to the money." The room seemed to contract. Seraphina's hands tightened on his phone. "You heard that. I came in earlier than you think." The silence between them changed texture. "My father," she started. Her voice came out wrong, raw in a way she hadn't prepared for. She pressed her lips together and tried again. "My father's death was not an accident," Damien said. The words landed somewhere below language, below thought, in the place where she had kept the things she had never been able to prove and never been able to stop knowing. She looked at him. He looked back at her. "Sleep," he said. "We can talk in the morning." He turned and left and pulled the door closed behind him, gently, which somehow was the most unsettling thing about all of it. Seraphina stood in the middle of the room in a dead man's coat, with her heart beating too hard and the ocean moving in the dark beyond the glass. Her father was not an accident. Damien Moretti knew something, and she was standing in his house. She didn't sleep for a long time. When she finally lay down, still wearing the robe she'd changed into, still listening to the rain against the windows, she realized she had left his jacket folded on the chair by the door. She thought about getting up and moving it somewhere more deliberate. She didn't. Outside, somewhere below in the dark of the estate, a light moved across the water. Damien on the balcony, standing alone in the rain that had not stopped, watching something she couldn't see from the window. And in the morning, she knew, the headlines would tell the city something had changed. She knew it the way you know a season is ending. Not because of any single thing, but because the quality of the air is different and your body understood before your mind did. What the morning would actually bring, she didn't know. But somewhere beneath the numbness and the exhaustion and the very specific horror of having been humiliated publicly by a woman who had stolen her life, something else was moving. Small and careful, and still mostly underground, like the first thing that grows after a hard winter. something that felt almost like it might eventually become dangerous. She woke before the light was fully up and lay still for almost a minute, listening. The rain had stopped sometime in the night. What replaced it was the ocean. Not loud, not dramatic, just the continuous low movement of water against stone, patient and indifferent. The kind of sound that reminded you that the world had been doing this before you arrived and would do it long after. The ceiling above her was unfamiliar plaster. The sheets were better than anything she'd slept on in 3 years. Both of these facts took a moment to process. Then the previous evening came back in sequence. The champagne, Vivian's fingers around her wrist, 400 people watching her fail to disappear, and then Damien Moretti's hand under her chin, lifting her face, and the sentence that had detonated through the ballroom like something with a charge in it. She belongs to me. Seraphina sat up. She belonged to nobody. That was the position she had arrived at after 24 years of evidence, and she wasn't adjusting it because a man in a good suit had said otherwise in front of witnesses. Even if the witnesses had gone very quiet when he said it. Even if part of her, the part she was keeping at arm's length this morning, had felt something when he said it that was not entirely unwelcome. She found clothes in the wardrobe, dark jeans, a gray knit sweater, flat shoes that were slightly too large but functional. She dressed quickly, pulled her hair back, and stood at the window for a moment looking at the ocean. Gray water under a gray sky. The estate grounds below were manicured and empty. No movement visible except the gulls working the updrafts near the cliff edge. She went downstairs. The kitchen was at the back of the house, east-facing, with windows that ran nearly floor to ceiling. A woman named Hara, compact, 50s, efficient in the way of someone who had decided a long time ago that interaction was a resource to be allocated carefully, was at the stove when Seraphina came in. She pointed at the coffee without being asked and returned to whatever she was doing. Seraphina poured coffee and stood at the window and drank it. Damien was on the lower terrace. He was on the phone, standing near the stone railing, dressed in dark clothing that looked like he might have already run or worked or done whatever it was that people like him did before the rest of the world was operational. He was facing the ocean. She could see his profile. He was speaking, but not with the animated looseness of casual conversation. Steady and clipped, the rhythm of someone transmitting information rather than exchanging it. He ended the call and stood for a moment looking at the water. Then he turned and looked directly at the kitchen window. Seraphina didn't step back. She didn't know why. She held the coffee cup with both hands and looked back at him through the glass and the distance between them, which was about 40 feet and felt like considerably less. He came inside. "You should eat," he said, coming through the terrace door. "I'm fine." "You didn't eat last night. Hara makes eggs." I said, "I'm fine." He looked at her the way he'd looked at her in the ballroom, reading the surface for what was underneath it, doing it without any particular self-consciousness. It was the kind of attention that made her feel like her face was a document he was reviewing. "Sit down," he said. "I'd rather stand." A pause. Then stand. He moved to the counter and poured his own coffee and leaned against the counter and waited. Seraphina set her cup down. "You said last night that my father's death wasn't an accident." She kept her voice even. "I want to know what you know." "I know quite a bit." "Then tell me." He studied the surface of his coffee. "Your father, Marcus Vale, ran shipping infrastructure for a consortium of import businesses in Valmera's East Corridor. On paper, legitimate. In practice, a percentage of the cargo was managed by parties he had no direct knowledge of, or limited knowledge of, for most of his career. When he discovered the full scope, approximately 4 years before his death, he began collecting documentation." Seraphina was very still. "He was building a case," she said. "He was building insurance. There's a difference." Damien looked up. He wasn't going to federal investigators. He was going to use what he had to extract himself cleanly, without drawing attention. Get out, stay quiet, protect his assets and his family. But it didn't work. No. Because someone found out. Because someone he trusted found out. A beat. The documentation he collected implicated several people who are still operating with considerable institutional protection in this city. When those people determined the documentation existed, they made a decision about Marcus Vale. Seraphina's hands were flat on the kitchen table now. She hadn't sat down, but she was holding the edge of it. "Who?" she said. "3 years ago, I wouldn't have been able to give you a name with certainty." He looked at her steadily. "Now I can give you several." "Then give them to me." "Not yet." She felt anger move through her, sharp and immediate and very clean. "Not yet," she repeated. "My father was murdered. Those same people have been working with my stepmother and Vivian for 3 years to make sure I stayed discredited enough that nobody would take it seriously if I tried to talk about any of this. And you're telling me not yet?" "I'm telling you that giving you names right now without context or preparation is the fastest way to make sure none of those people ever face consequences for what they did." His voice hadn't changed. No heat, no defensiveness, just the same flat steadiness. "I've been building this for 3 years. You've been in this room for 8 hours. I need you to understand the architecture before you start touching the walls. Don't talk to me like I'm a child. I'm not. You're managing me. I'm managing the situation." He set down his cup. "Those are different things, and I think you're smart enough to know it." She stared at him. He held the eye contact without difficulty. "What do you want from me?" she asked. "Nothing." "That's not an answer." "It's the only honest one I have right now." She let the silence run for a moment, testing it. "The documentation my father collected," she said. "Do you have it, or do you know where it is?" Something moved in his eyes. Not surprise exactly, more like the adjustment a person makes when a conversation moves faster than they anticipated. "I have some of it," he said. "There's more I haven't been able to locate." "Where?" "We don't know." "Who's we?" "People I trust. A small number." "Do you trust anyone?" The question came out more personal than she'd intended. He looked at her for a moment with an expression she couldn't read. "2 people," he said. "Currently." She picked up her coffee. "I want to know everything," she said. "Not the version you've decided I can handle. Everything." Another pause. Longer this time. "After breakfast," he said. She looked at him. "Fine," she said. "After breakfast." Tom. The headlines were bad. She read them on the tablet Hara set beside her plate without comment. 4 different news outlets had the story. 2 more had the photo. The photo was the one from the ballroom. Damien's coat around her shoulders, his hand at the small of her back. Both of them moving through 400 people who had parted to let them through. It was a good photo, technically. Sharp and well-lit and compositionally precise in the way of an image that understood exactly what it was capturing. The headlines ranged from breathless to pointed. Moretti makes unexpected appearance at Gala. Mystery woman at Valmera's most dangerous side. Who is she? One outlet had already identified her. Seraphina Vale's, daughter of the late shipping magnate Marcus Vale, photographed with East Coast crime figure, and included a sidebar about her father's death and a careful selection of the rumors that had been seeded about her over the past 3 years. She read the sidebar twice. Unstable. History of erratic behavior. Financial irregularities following her father's death. The rumors Vivian had cultivated so carefully, now freshly laundered through a reputable outlet, given renewed circulation by proximity to Damien's name. She set down the tablet. "They're using this to refresh the narrative about me," she said. "Yes." He was reading his own phone across the table. "They'll run a cycle. The original story, then a correction, then the background piece. By the end of the week, the dominant version in circulation will be that you've attached yourself to Moretti for financial protection, which establishes you as either calculating or desperate. Either framing neutralizes you." They've done this before. "They do this routinely. It's an effective system." "You sound almost admiring." He looked up. "I'm not. I'm describing it accurately because you need to understand what you're looking at." She looked at the photo again. At herself. Smaller than she felt in the memory, wrapped in his coat, face angled down and slightly away from the room, expression unreadable from this angle. She looked like someone who had just stepped out of something without knowing what she'd stepped into. That was accurate. "What happens now?" she said. "People will watch to see what I do, how I respond. Whether you appear in public with me or disappear into the estate. He set down his phone. What I do next is deliberate. What you do next is your decision. What would you recommend? That's the first time you've asked for my opinion. Don't make a thing of it. Almost. Something shifted in his face. Not quite a smile. The ghost of the muscle memory of one. I'd recommend, he said carefully, that you stay visible. Not hidden. Not isolated. That changes the framing. She thought about that. And you? What do you do? I make it clear that what happened last night was not impulsive. Was it? The pause was exactly 1 beat too long. No, he said. Eat. Vivian called at 11. Seraphina's phone had been retrieved from the hotel Lost and Found. One of Damien's people had collected her bag from the employee locker room without any apparent difficulty, which was its own piece of information. The phone showed 14 missed calls from an unknown number she recognized as the Vale Foundation's main line. 2 voicemails from Celeste, 6 texts from Vivian that escalated from measured to frantic across about 4 hours. The last text read, "We need to talk before you do something that can't be undone. Call me." Seraphina read it standing near the window of the room she'd slept in. The something that can't be undone had already happened, and Vivian knew it. This wasn't an olive branch. This was the call a person makes when they're trying to locate the edges of a new problem so they can start managing it. She called back. Vivian answered on the first ring. Seraphina. Her voice was careful, stripped of the performance quality it had last night. This was Vivian without an audience, which was a different register entirely. Tighter, more precise, like a wire that had been pulled taut. "You called me," Seraphina said. "Yes. I wanted to." A pause. "Last night got out of hand. Did it? I didn't intend for it to escalate the way it did. You poured champagne on me in front of 400 people. I was..." Another pause, this one more controlled. "I reacted poorly. You know how complicated things get between us." Seraphina sat down on the edge of the bed. "What do you want, Vivian?" The shift in approach was immediate. The pretense of reconciliation dropped cleanly. "I want to know what you've told him." "I haven't told him anything." "You've been in his house since last night. You've been tracking me." "I've been reading the same news as everyone else." A beat. "Sarah, this man is not what you think he is. Whatever he's told you about himself, about us, he hasn't told me anything about you. It's a manipulation. That's what he does. He finds people who are vulnerable and he offers them something they need, and then he uses them." "Interesting that you're suddenly concerned about people using me." Vivian's breath went slightly uneven, a small tell. "I'm serious. Whatever he's promised you, he hasn't promised me anything. Then why are you still there?" Seraphina looked at the wall opposite. At the painting there, it's a seascape, entirely ordinary. The kind of thing chosen to fill a space rather than define it. "Because I want to be," she said. The line was quiet for 3 full seconds. "You're making a mistake," Vivian said. The careful voice was gone now. What replaced it was something harder and less controlled. "Whatever you think you know about what happened with Dad, you don't have the full picture. Tell me the full picture then. Not over the phone. In person then. Come back to the foundation. Come home and we can..." "That house stopped being home the week after the funeral," Seraphina said. "You know that. You made sure of it." The silence this time was different, charged in a way that the earlier silences hadn't been. "Listen to me very carefully," Vivian said. Her voice had dropped below the register she used for most conversations, gone into something that Seraphina recognized from childhood as the voice Vivian only used when she was truly frightened. The people Moretti is involved with, the people he's built his business against, they don't just destroy reputations. You understand what I'm saying? You've been kept out of this. You've been protected? The word came out with more edge than Seraphina intended. Yes, protected, whether you want to believe that or not. Protected by who? By you? By Celeste? By the people who killed my father and spent 3 years making sure I couldn't talk about it without being dismissed as unstable? Vivian said nothing. I know what you are, Seraphina said. I've known for a long time. I just couldn't prove it. Sarah, don't call me that. She ended the call. Her hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against her thighs and breathed through it. 4 counts in, hold, 4 out. A thing she'd learned from a therapist she could no longer afford, and practiced in the bathrooms of restaurants and hotel event spaces, and catering break rooms. After a minute, she stood up and went to find Damien. He was in the study at the back of the house, a room she hadn't been in yet, bookshelves on 2 walls, a desk that had actual paper on it, which surprised her, a laptop open, 2 phones. One of the 2 people he'd described trusting was in the room with him, a woman named Lena, roughly Damien's age, with the kind of face that had been assembled for information rather than impression, sharp and watchful, and carrying a particular stillness that felt like the same school as Damien's. Lena looked at Seraphina when she came in and said nothing. Damien looked up from the desk. She called, Seraphina said. I know. You monitored my call? I monitored my house perimeter. Your call came through on a line we were already watching. He didn't apologize for it. What did she say? Seraphina crossed the room and sat in the chair across the desk. She told me you were manipulating me, that I was vulnerable and you were exploiting that. Reasonable thing for her to say. She said I'd been protected by them, from you and the people you're built against. Lena made a small sound that might have been a laugh and wasn't. Damien's face was very still. She's not entirely wrong about one thing, he said. Seraphina looked at him. You have been kept out of it, but not to protect you. He opened a folder on the desk and slid it across to her. To protect them. Inside the folder were photographs, documents, a chain of financial records so dense with account numbers and transaction dates that it took her a moment to orient to what she was looking at. Then she recognized the corporate name on the top sheet, Vale Meridian Holdings, her father's company, or what had been her father's company. The asset transfers started 8 months before your father died, Lena said from behind her. The foundation was restructured, the shipping contracts were renegotiated, all of it paperworked as normal business operations. Efficiency reorganization, liability management, clean on the surface. They were moving everything out of reach before they killed him, Seraphina said. Before they had him killed, Damien corrected quietly. There's a distinction. She looked at the transaction records, dates and numbers. The dry arithmetic of a premeditated theft that had ended with her father on a stretcher in November 3 years ago, and the official finding of cardiac arrest, and nobody looking harder than that because the paperwork was so clean. She turned the page. The next sheet was a photograph. She didn't recognize the man in it immediately. He was in his 60s, heavy set, photographed at a table in what looked like a private dining room. Across from him sat a woman whose profile Seraphina knew well enough that her stomach clenched. Celeste, 2 weeks before her father died. Who is he? She said. Felix Crane, Damien said. He runs the capital infrastructure for a consortium that operates across 4 eastern cities. Legitimate front of the house, full criminal architecture underneath. Your father's shipping operation was one of 17 businesses feeding into Crane's network. A pause. When your father began extracting documentation, Crane made the call. And Celeste was informed. Whether she initiated or consented or was simply aware, that's a distinction that will matter in a courtroom. Seraphina looked at the photograph for a long time. Her father had been a complicated man. She knew that. Not a saint, not entirely clean, operating in a city that didn't reward cleanliness. But he had been her father, and he had been trying to get out, and someone had decided that trying to get out was unacceptable. Vivian said she was frightened, she said. On the phone. Genuinely. She should be, Damien said. The people she's in business with don't distinguish between useful allies and loose ends once the situation changes. Has the situation changed? Last night changed it. He looked at her directly. When I walked out of that ballroom with you, I made a public statement about my interest in your situation. The people watching that room, and several of them were watching, will now be calculating what that means, what you might know, what I might have told you. You hadn't told me anything yet. They don't know that. The logic of it was horrible in a clean way. She hadn't known anything when she walked out of the Laurent ballroom. She'd been a waitress in a wet catering jacket. But by choosing to leave with Damien, by existing within his visible perimeter, she had become something different in the calculation of dangerous people, a variable that needed accounting for. So I'm a target now, she said. You were already a target. Now you're a visible one. A pause. That's not entirely worse. She looked at him. You have a very unusual way of offering reassurance. I'm not offering reassurance, I'm offering accuracy. Lena moved to the desk and pulled up something on the laptop, turning it toward Seraphina. A social network map. Names connected by lines of varying thickness, dense near the center, diffuse at the edges. In the center, 3 names connected by thick lines. Felix Crane, a judge named Weybridge, a city councilman named Ruiz, and at the edge of the network, connected by a thinner line to Crane's node, a name she recognized, Celeste Dupont Vale. And connected to Celeste, even thinner, Vivienne. They're not the architects, Lena said. They're the local conduit, social access, property, legitimate-looking financial flows, useful but not essential. Which means, Seraphina said carefully, that if Crane decides they've become a liability, he's done it before, Damien said. The room was quiet. Seraphina looked at the map for a long time, at the lines connecting people she had known to people she was only now learning about, at the architecture of the thing that had destroyed her family. You said you have some of the documentation my father collected, she said. Where did you get it? Damien was quiet for a moment. A man who worked for your father contacted me 14 months ago. He'd been sitting on a partial set of documents for 2 years, afraid to move. He came to me because he ran out of other options. Who? His name was Carr, Thomas Carr. He handled logistics for Vale Meridian. The past tense arrived a beat before she processed it. Was, she said. He died in a car accident 6 months ago. Damien's voice was even. The documentation he gave me is what built the backbone of what I'm holding. But Carr told me there was a primary archive, a full copy of everything Marcus collected. He didn't know where it was. My father would have hidden it, she said. Yes. He was careful, methodical. She was thinking out loud, the memories moving in unexpected ways. Her father at his desk, late at night, the locked cabinet she'd never been allowed near. The safe deposit box at a bank in the city center whose existence she'd only learned about from a lawyer after the funeral, and that had been empty when they opened it. Empty, or emptied. He would have given access to someone. Not Celeste. Never Celeste. The certainty was absolute. He knew she wasn't. She stopped. He knew. He knew about her relationship with Crane? I don't know what exactly he knew, but he knew she wasn't safe. She pressed her fingers against the edge of the desk. He would have given it to someone he trusted completely. Who did he trust completely? She thought about it. The answer came slowly, the way answers do when they've been buried under 3 years of grief and survival, and the deliberate numbness you build to get through days that would otherwise be unlivable. His lawyer, she said, Martin Shea, old family attorney. He retired the year before Dad died, moved up to the coast somewhere. I don't know exactly. She paused. He never liked Celeste. Lena was already typing. There's something else, Seraphina said. She looked at Damien. Vivienne said something on the phone that she didn't mean to say. She said I'd been kept out of it, as if that was deliberate, as if it was a choice someone made and maintained over time. Damien was watching her carefully. If they've been actively managing my exclusion, keeping me discredited, keeping me out of the circles where this would come up, then someone has been coordinating that. Not just Celeste reacting opportunistically after Dad died. An ongoing, managed effort. Well, that's consistent with what we've seen in the financial records, Lena said. The reputation management campaign, the rumors, the outlets that ran them, those were seeded through a PR firm. We traced the billing. To Crane's network? To an entity 2 removes from Crane's network. Legally defensible distance. She paused. But yes. Seraphina sat with that for a moment. 3 years. Someone had spent 3 years maintaining the machinery of her erasure, paying people to seed stories, managing her distance from anything that could give her traction. Not just Vivian's casual cruelty, an organized, funded operation, because she was her father's daughter, because they were never entirely certain what he might have told her. She looked at Damien. "This goes to federal investigators," she said, "when it's complete, when it's airtight, when the primary archive is in hand." He looked back at her steadily. "Premature exposure kills the case and the people who built it, and keeps the people responsible out in the world. Temporarily, yes." She hated it. She sat with hating it for a few seconds, and then filed it under things that were true, regardless of how she felt about them. "The Winter Symphony Gala," Lena said, not looking up from the laptop. "It's in 9 days. Felix Crane is attending? Confirmed. It's one of 3 events per year where we can place him in the same physical space as Weybridge and Ruiz simultaneously." Seraphina looked at her. "What does that mean?" "It means," Damien said slowly, "that 9 days from now there's a window." "A window for what?" He looked at her. Something moved in his gray eyes. Not quite calculation, not quite warning. Something between the two. "A window that changes what comes after," he said. And outside the study window, a car moved slowly along the road at the edge of the estate perimeter. Too slowly. The kind of slow that wasn't about traffic. Lena saw it first and was already on her feet. "We've got a problem," she said, and the morning, which had felt almost manageable, came apart at the car didn't stop. That was the first thing. It moved along the perimeter road at that wrong speed. Too deliberate, too controlled, the pace of something making a decision rather than passing through. And then it kept going and rounded the stone wall at the north corner and was gone. Lena tracked it on the estate's camera feed for 40 seconds until it cleared the second checkpoint and disappeared onto the coastal highway heading south. "Same plate as yesterday," she said. Damien was already at the window. "Yesterday," Seraphina said, "a vehicle made 2 passes on the perimeter road during the night." He didn't look at her when he said it. "We logged it as routine surveillance, standard after a public event." "You didn't tell me." There was nothing actionable yet. She felt something tighten in her chest. Not quite fear, not quite anger, the specific sensation of realizing the walls of a situation are closer than you thought. "Is that how you define actionable? When someone's already inside?" He turned from the window. "Nobody's inside. Yet." He held her gaze for a moment. Then he looked at Lena. "Pull the registration. Run it against the Crane Network's known vehicle assets." "Already running." Lena's fingers moved across the keyboard without looking up. 40 seconds. The study was very quiet except for the sound of the ocean through the glass and the specific silence of people in a room who are thinking faster than they're speaking. Seraphina stood near the desk with her hands loose at her sides and looked at the social network map still open on the laptop screen. The lines connecting Crane to Weybridge to Ruiz. Celeste at the edge. Vivian, thinner, still. The architecture of the thing that had killed her father. Still operating. Still watching. "Clean registration," Lena said. "Rental company. Account opened 6 weeks ago under a business name. Shell." She paused. "But the billing address is a property 2 removes from a holding company that routes through Crane's infrastructure." "So they know I'm here," Seraphina said. "They knew within an hour of the gala," Damien said. "The question isn't whether they know. The question is what they're calculating." "And what are they calculating?" He moved back to the desk. Sat down. He moved like someone who had made peace a long time ago with the fact that threat was a permanent condition of his environment. No heightened tension in it, just adjustment, the way a sailor adjusts for wind. "They're calculating whether you're an asset or a liability," he said. "Whether you know something or whether you're simply an inconvenience that attached itself to a visible problem." He looked at the map. "The surveillance is information gathering. They're not ready to move yet." "What changes that?" "If they determine you have access to the primary archive," he paused, "or if they determine that I'm close to completing what I've been building." "Are you?" He looked at her. "I was," he said. Before last night changed the timeline. She sat down. I changed your timeline. The situation changed my timeline. There's a difference. He said it without any particular weight, but she heard the echo of her own earlier words in it. Not quite deliberate, more like two people who had started speaking the same language without planning to. 9 days, she said. The Symphony Gala, Crane, Weybridge, Ruiz in the same room. That's still the window. But now they're watching this house. They were always going to watch this house. I've been watched for 3 years. A beat. What matters now is Martin Shea. Lena looked up. I found him, she said. Martin Shea, retired. He's in Ardenna. Small coastal town about 90 minutes north. He's been there since he retired. He's 71. No criminal record, no apparent network connections, no contact with the Vale Foundation since Marcus's estate was processed. She paused. He did retain a safety deposit box at a bank in Ardenna about 4 years ago. Timing aligns. Seraphina and Damien looked at each other. That's the archive, she said. Maybe, he said. It's the archive. He was quiet for a moment. I need to go to him, she said. He won't open a door for your people. He barely knew me. I met him 3 or 4 times as a child, but I'm Marcus Vale's daughter. That means something. Going to Ardenna means leaving the estate, being visible on a road they're already watching. Then we go in a way they're not expecting. He studied her face. You've been awake for less than 4 hours, he said. My father's been dead for 3 years. She held his gaze. Tell me how to do this. They left at noon in a vehicle she didn't recognize. Not one of the estate's black SUVs, but a gray sedan, ordinary to the point of invisibility, driven by a man named Vasek, who said nothing and drove like someone who had learned in circumstances where mistakes had real consequences. Damien sat in the back with her. For the first 20 minutes, neither of them spoke. The coastal road was empty in the midday gray, the ocean visible between breaks in the embankment to their left, the sky the color of old concrete. Seraphina watched the road behind them in the wing mirror. Nothing followed, or nothing visible followed. Tell me about your sister, she said. The shift in his posture was small. She felt it rather than saw it. A subtle reordering, something that had been held in place, making a minor adjustment. What do you know about her, what? He said. Nothing. I know you had one. Past tense. She kept her eyes on the mirror. I've been trying to understand why you did what you did last night. In the ballroom. The people I've read about. The things attributed to you. They don't describe a man who crosses a room to defend a stranger. He was quiet for long enough that she thought he'd decided not to answer. Isabella, he said. She was 7 years younger than me. She came to Valmera after our parents died. She was 17. I had already been in the city for 3 years. Already building. He paused. I was occupied with other things. I wasn't watching the way I should have been. Seraphina waited. She got involved with people who understood how to find young women who didn't have anchors, who needed something. They made her need them first. His voice was even throughout. The evenness of something that has been processed to the point of scar tissue. When she became inconvenient to them, they destroyed her reputation. The same mechanics, rumors, strategic isolation, ensuring nobody credible would listen if she spoke. And then He stopped. You don't have to. She died in the winter of the year she turned 22. He looked at the road ahead. The official finding was self-inflicted. It wasn't. The car moved through the gray afternoon. I'm sorry, Seraphina said. I spent 10 years making sure I had enough power that it couldn't happen inside my reach again. He looked at her then, briefly, directly. Last night I watched a room full of people perform the beginning of the same sequence. The public humiliation as the opening move, the laughter, the isolation. His jaw moved slightly. I don't care what it looked like. I don't care what they print about it. She understood then, with the full weight of it, what she had been to him in that ballroom. Not a woman. A chance to be somewhere he hadn't been 6 years earlier. She looked back out the window. She would have been about my age, she said. 2 years younger. They didn't speak again until Ardenna. Martin Shea lived in a gray stone house set back from the harbor in a town that smelled of seaweed and boat fuel and the particular quiet of a place where people had come specifically to be left alone. The house had a low gate, a garden that was cared for with the methodical attention of a man filling his days deliberately, and curtains in the front window that moved slightly when the car came down the lane. He was watching before they stopped. Seraphina got out alone, as agreed. Vasek stayed with the car. Damien stayed in the car, which she understood. The sight of him would close the door instantly. She walked to the gate. The front door opened before she reached it. Martin Shea was 71 and looked it in the way of men who have stopped trying to look otherwise. White-haired, heavy through the shoulders, with the face of someone who had spent decades being present in rooms where very bad things were being decided. He had the lawyer's specific stillness, the ability to look at something without visibly reacting to it. He looked at her. She watched him find her father in her face. "Seraphina," he said, "you remember me. You look exactly like him." He said it quietly. "Come inside." The front room smelled of wood polish and old paper. He made tea with the automatic movements of a man for whom hospitality was physical memory rather than intention. She sat at his kitchen table and watched him, and waited. He set the cups down and sat across from her and looked at his hands. "I've been expecting someone," he said. "For about a year, maybe longer." He looked up. "I wasn't sure whether it would be you or someone else." "What kind of someone else?" "The kind your father was trying to protect you from." He wrapped his hands around his cup. "Who came with you?" "A man named Moretti." Something moved in Shea's face. Recognition, and beneath it a layer of something more complicated. "I know who Damien Moretti is," he said. "Then you know he's been building a case against the people responsible for my father's death." "I know he's been building something." A pause. "Your father knew about Moretti 3 years before he died. He had a choice about who to trust with what he'd collected, and he made a decision." Seraphina went very still. "What decision?" "He didn't trust Moretti." Shea looked at her steadily. He believed Moretti was too embedded in the same network, that using him would be trading one set of chains for another. The kitchen was very quiet. "And now," she said, "and now your father's dead, and I'm a 71-year-old retired attorney sitting in a house on the coast, and the people who killed him are still operating." He set down his cup. "So I've had 3 years to decide whether his caution was wisdom or whether it was the kind of mistake that happens when a careful man is also a frightened one." "What did you decide?" He looked at her for a long moment. "I decided to let his daughter make that call," he said. He stood and went to the back of the house. She heard a door open, and then sounds she couldn't identify. And then he came back with a flat metal case, the kind used for documents, fireproofed and lockable, the size of a large briefcase. He set it on the table between them. "Everything your father collected," he said. 43 months of documentation. Financial records, communications logs, recordings, the full picture." He sat back down. "He gave it to me 2 weeks before he died. He said if something happened, I should wait. That the right person would come, and I'd know them because they'd come with questions rather than demands." Seraphina looked at the case. "You've had this for 3 years." "I've had it for 3 years." 3 years. While she was working in bars and catering companies and building a careful, invisible life. While Thomas Carr was sitting on a partial copy and being afraid. While Damien was assembling a case from fragments. The full archive had been 90 minutes north the entire time. "I need to bring Damien in," she said. Shea looked at her. "You trust him?" "I don't fully trust anyone," she said, "but I trust that his interest in finishing this is real." She paused. "And I trust that he understands what happens to people who get in the way of it." Something in Shea's face shifted. He'd heard what she wasn't saying. "Bring him in," he said. Oot. Damien came through the front door and into the kitchen and looked at the case on the table without touching it. He looked at Shea. Shea looked back at him with the assessment of a man who had spent a career reading people in rooms and trusted his conclusions. "Your father had a specific concern about me," Damien said to Seraphina. "Not a question." She looked at him. He thought you were too close to the network. He wasn't entirely wrong, Damien said. 3 years ago, I was operating closer to Crane's infrastructure than I am now. The architecture looked different from the outside. And from the inside? Shay said. I was using Crane's peripheral network as cover for building the case against it. He looked at the old lawyer directly, which is not a distinction that would have been visible to Marcus Vale from his position. No, Shea said. It wasn't. Is it verifiable now? A pause. Parts of it. Damien nodded. He pulled out the chair across from Shay and sat down. Then let's verify it, he said. Before we open that case, I want you to hear what I have and tell me where it diverges from what's in there. If I'm what you're concerned I might be, that'll be visible in the gaps. Shay looked at him for a long moment. Then he nodded. For the next 2 hours, Seraphina sat at the edge of the kitchen table and listened to two men cross-reference 3 years of assembled evidence against 43 months of primary documentation, and watched the architecture of her father's murder come fully into focus for the first time. Felix Crane, the judge, the councilman. 4 additional names she hadn't heard before, say 2 in the federal oversight structure, 1 in the Port Authority, 1 in the city's financial regulation office. A network that had been operating for 11 years, that had absorbed her father's shipping operation as a useful conduit, that had decided Marcus Vale's attempted extraction was a threat that required a permanent solution. Celeste had known. The timeline made it inarguable. The asset transfers, the documentation, the meeting with Crane 2 weeks before Marcus's death. She had known, and she had not acted to prevent it, and she had been compensated for her cooperation with the inheritance, and the assets, and the house. Vivian was more complicated. There were gaps in the record around her, places where her knowledge and involvement were suggested but not documented with the same precision. Seraphina was looking at a photograph. Crane at the table, Celeste across from him, taken 2 weeks before her father's cardiac arrest. When Lena called, Damien answered on the first ring. Seraphina watched his face. She had been watching his face for 2 hours across the kitchen table, learning its geography the way you learn a place you expect to spend time in. The slight movement at his jaw when something landed as confirmation rather than surprise. The quality of stillness that was different from the stillness of active thinking. She could read it now, a little. Not fully, but enough. She watched it change. The change was small. Most people wouldn't have seen it. But she had been watching carefully. And she saw the specific recalibration of a person receiving information that reorganizes something they thought was settled. He ended the call. He looked at the table for a moment. Then he looked at Seraphina with the expression of a man about to deliver something he had not prepared to deliver. What? She said. Lena ran the full surveillance analysis. The vehicle this morning, she traced it back through 3 shell layers. He stopped. Tell me. It wasn't Crane's people. The kitchen was very quiet. Then whose? She said. Damien set down his phone on the table with a care that felt deliberate. The billing chain terminates at a logistics company registered in the Midlands. The company's only known client for the past 14 months is a private security consulting firm. He looked at her. The firm is owned by a holding company. The holding company has one named director. Seraphina already knew. She felt it before he said it. The specific nausea of a truth arriving that you had been positioned to receive without knowing it. Lena, he said. The director's name. He turned the phone toward her. On the screen was a corporate registration document. She read the director's name once, and then read it again because the first time felt like a mistake. It wasn't a mistake. Thomas Carr, who was supposed to be dead, who Damien had told her died in a car accident 6 months ago, who had, according to the corporate registration timestamp, filed directorship paperwork 11 months ago. She looked up. Damien's face was controlled in the specific way of someone who has just realized that something they were certain of is wrong and is now rapidly reassessing what else might be wrong alongside it. You told me he was dead, she said. Her voice was very flat. I was told he was dead. By who? By one of 2 people I said I trusted. The sentence landed in the room like something physical. Shay had gone very still in the way of an old man watching something he had feared become real. Seraphina looked at Damien, at the face she had spent 2 hours learning to read, at the gray eyes that were processing with a speed she could almost see. And she felt the floor of the situation shift beneath her in a way that had nothing to do with Thomas Carr. "Which one?" she said. "I don't know yet." "You have 2 people you trust. One of them told you Carr was dead. Which one?" His jaw moved slightly. "Lena," he said, "or Vasek." She stood up. "Vasek is outside with the car," she said. Damien was already moving. They came through the front door in time to see the gray sedan still in the lane exactly where they'd left it, engine off, Vasek's silhouette visible in the driver's seat. Nothing wrong with the image, everything wrong with the image. Because Vasek had been sitting in that car for 2 hours in a small coastal town with one road in and one road out. And if he was the one who had fed Damien false information about Carr's death, if he was the one who had been running surveillance on the estate through Carr's shell company, then he had known exactly where they were going and exactly why. Which meant someone else knew. Which meant the archive, the case, everything Marcus Vale had spent the last months of his life building, was no longer safe in this house. Damien's hand was at his jacket. Seraphina's fingers found his arm. "Wait," she said. He looked at her. "If we move wrong now," she said, "everything goes. The archive. Shay. All of it." He was looking at the car, at Vasek's silhouette, 30 feet between them and a man who might be exactly what he appeared to be, a driver waiting, or might be the point of entry for everything they were trying to keep contained. The wind off the harbor moved through the lane. A gull called somewhere above the roofline. And Seraphina felt, with a cold clarity that was nothing like fear and everything like its aftermath, that whatever she had been before this moment, invisible, erased, the woman in the too large catering jacket who said she was nobody, was not capable of surviving what was coming next. Something was going to have to change. She was going to have to be the one to... She walked to the car. Damien's hand caught her wrist. "Don't," he said. "If he's watching us stand here calculating, we've already lost the initiative." She pulled her wrist free. Not roughly, just cleanly, the way a person removes something that doesn't belong on them. "I'm going to knock on the window. I'm going to tell him Shay needs help carrying something. You watch his hands." "Seraphina, watch his hands." She crossed the lane before he could argue. Her feet on the gravel were too loud. Everything was too loud. The harbor wind, the gulls, her own breathing, which she was controlling with the specific mechanical effort of someone who understood that if it broke now, everything broke. She counted her steps. 8. The car was ordinary gray in the flat afternoon light. Vasek's silhouette was motionless in the driver's seat. She knocked on the window. He turned. His face was what it had always been. Unremarkable, watchful, the kind of face that belonged in the background of things. He lowered the window. "Shay needs the case carried," she said. "It's heavy." Vasek looked at her. His eyes moved to her face and stayed there, and she let them, held his gaze with the blankness she'd spent 3 years perfecting, the expression that said there is nothing here worth reading. He nodded. He opened the door and got out. His hands were empty. Damien was 4 steps behind her when Vasek cleared the door, and she saw in Damien's face the rapid recalculation. Hands empty, posture neutral, no phone, no signal. Either Vasek was clean and she had just done something very straightforward, or he was the best controlled man either of them had ever encountered. They went back inside. Shay looked at Vasek the way he'd looked at everything today, steadily, without performing a reaction. Vasek looked at the case on the table. Something moved across his face so briefly that Seraphina almost missed it. Not surprise. Recognition. She filed it and said nothing. They spent 20 minutes discussing extraction, how to move the archive safely, where to bring it, who had access to the secure facility Damien used for sensitive materials. Vasek said 4 words in that 20 minutes. All 4 were logistical. His eyes stayed mostly on the table. On the drive back, Seraphina sat in the rear seat with the metal case across her knees. She kept her hands flat on its surface and looked at the road ahead and said nothing about what she'd seen in Vasek's face. Damien sat beside her. He was on his phone for most of the drive. Short exchanges, clipped, a frequency she hadn't heard from him before. He was moving pieces. She could feel it, the invisible reorganization of something large. 20 minutes from the estate, she leaned close to him. His face, she said very quietly. When he saw the case, Damien didn't look at her. I saw it, he said. What are you doing? Adjusting. To what? He finally looked at her. His gray eyes were very flat. To the possibility that I've had a problem inside my house for longer than tonight. They reached the estate at 3:30. Lena met them at the inner gate, which she had never done before. That alone was information. Her face had the quality of someone who has been thinking very hard and very fast, and has arrived at conclusions she doesn't like. Talk, Damien said. Inside. Vasek pulled the car to the garage. Seraphina got out with the case and followed Damien and Lena through the service entrance, through the back corridor, into the study. The door closed. The surveillance vehicle, Lena said. I went deeper on the corporate chain. The logistics company, the one registered to Carr, it received a wire transfer 14 months ago. The transfer originated from an account I recognized. Damien was completely still. It's one of ours, she said. Which one? She pulled up the screen. Account number, transaction record. The date was 14 months ago, 2 weeks after she'd first told Damien that Thomas Carr had contacted her and asked for a secure meeting. Damien looked at the account number for a long time. That account clears through Vasek's operational budget, he said. Yes. The study was quiet. Seraphina put the case down on the desk and looked at both of them. So Vasek paid to establish the surveillance shell company, she said, before he told you Carr was dead. Before he told me Carr was in a car accident, Damien said. The correction was quiet and precise. I don't know when Carr actually... He stopped, restarted. I need to know whether Carr is alive. Lena was already on it. I've been running that for an hour, she said. The car accident, the incident report is real. The body was identified by a family member. She paused. The family member was a cousin. The cousin is currently employed by a logistics company in the Midlands. The same logistics company? Yes. Seraphina pressed her fingers against the desk. So Carr faked his death, she said, or someone faked it for him, and then he, or someone using his name, established a surveillance operation targeting this estate. Targeting whoever I brought inside this estate, Damien said. She looked at him. He knew you'd bring someone connected to the archive here eventually, she said. He was waiting. Or Vasek told him I'd brought you here, last night, and the surveillance this morning was the response. Call Vasek in, she said. Not yet. Damien, not yet. His voice didn't rise, but it closed the sentence absolutely. If we call him in now and we're wrong about the scope, we lose what we don't know. He looked at the case. First, I need to know what's in there that's worth all of this. He looked at Shay. Shay had come with them. Damien had made that call in the car, wordlessly, with a look to Seraphina that she'd understood as confirmation that leaving the old man alone in Ardenna was no longer a safe option. Shea sat in the chair near the window, with his hands in his lap and the expression of a man who was tired in a way that sleep didn't touch. Open it, Damien said to Seraphina. She opened the case. The recordings were the piece that changed everything. Marcus Vale had been meticulous. The documents were organized by date and subject, indexed in her father's precise handwriting, cross-referenced in a way that made the whole archive navigable even without him there to explain it. Financial records she had already seen versions of. Transaction chains. Corporate structures. The architecture of Crane's operation mapped in her father's hand over 3 years of careful observation. But then the recordings. 41 audio files on a compact drive stored in a sealed envelope at the bottom of the case. Lena played the first 3 through the study speakers and the room went completely still. Her father's voice. She hadn't heard it in 3 years. It was him. The specific cadence, the slight formality he used when he was being precise about something, the way he breathed before particularly important sentences. She kept her face composed with an effort that cost her something she could feel physically, a tightening across her throat and chest that she swallowed back down and locked. Not now. Later. The recordings were made over 18 months. Business meetings, telephone calls, 2 in-person conversations in what sounded like a restaurant, ambient noise, other voices at the edges, her father's measured tones underneath it all. Felix Crane's voice appeared in the 7th recording. She had never heard it before. It was a voice built for negotiation. Smooth, unhurried, the voice of a man who understood that patience was its own form of pressure. The recording lasted 12 minutes. By the end of it, the nature of the arrangement between Crane's consortium and Vale Meridian was inarguable, explicit. Her father had documented it in real time, with dates and figures and the names of the other parties, letting the conversation build its own indictment. That's a federal case by itself, Lena said. There's more, Shay said. There was more. The 39th recording was the one that stopped the room. It was a phone call. Her father's voice, terse and frightened in a way she had never heard from him, a quality that didn't belong in her memory of him. And on the other end, a voice she knew. Not Crane, not Weybridge. A voice she had spent the last 24 hours trusting. Lena's face went very careful. Damien stood up from the desk. Seraphina looked at the speaker and then at Damien, and the question was already forming in her mind. The question of when this recording was made and what it meant and how long, but Damien's phone went off before she could ask it. He looked at the screen. His face did something she hadn't seen it do before. It went past the controlled stillness into something underneath it, something older and less managed. He answered. Vasek, he said. The voice on the phone was not Vasek. It was a voice she didn't know, male, flat in the way of someone reading from a position of advantage. We have your man, the voice said. He's been very cooperative. A pause. We'd like to discuss the case Ms. Vale brought back from Ardenna, and we'd like to discuss it tonight. Damien looked at the case on the desk. Where? He said. The Old Harbor District. Warehouse complex off Meridian Dock. You know it. I know it. 11 o'clock. Ms. Vale comes. The case comes. You come with no more than 2 additional people. A beat. If the case doesn't come, Vasek doesn't come back. Damien ended the call. The study was absolutely silent. Seraphina looked at him. They have Vasek, she said. Yes. Is he? I don't know. She looked at the case. At the 41 recordings and 3 years of her father's careful, frightened, meticulous work. You can't give them this, she said. I know. Then how? I need 20 minutes, he said. He was already moving. Lena. Copies, everything. Encrypted and distributed to 3 separate locations before 9 o'clock tonight. He looked at Seraphina. And we need to talk about what's on that 39th recording. She looked at him. His face was controlled again, but she could see the effort now. She had learned too much of his geography in the last 12 hours to miss it. You already knew, she said. Not a question. He held her gaze. I suspected, he said, for about 3 months. I didn't have confirmation. And now you do. And now I do. She sat back down. The 39th recording. Her father's voice, frightened, and on the other end, the voice she had spent 24 hours in a house with, the voice of someone who had explained the architecture of her father's murder to her across a kitchen table with the patient precision of a person who understood it from the inside. Not Vasek. Lena. The conversation that followed was the worst 20 minutes of Seraphina's life, which was a significant threshold given the competition. Lena didn't run. That was the first thing, and it was important. When Damien played the recording and looked at her, Lena sat in the chair near the window and looked back at him and didn't run, which was either the response of an innocent person or the response of someone who had already calculated that running was not the optimal move. It's my voice, Lena said. Yes. That call was made 2 years and 4 months ago. I know when it was made. I was still inside Crane's infrastructure 2 years and 4 months ago. Her voice was very steady. She was looking at Damien with the directness of someone spending their credibility carefully. You know that. You know exactly when I came over and what it cost. I know what you told me. It's the same thing. Is it? The silence between them was dense with something Seraphina couldn't fully read, the specific weight of a relationship that had been built on mutual trust across years, now being stress-tested in real time. Marcus Vale called me, Lena said. 2 years and 4 months ago, he found a number that connected back to my operational identity. He didn't know who I was or what I was doing. He thought I was inside Crane's network, and he was trying to negotiate. Negotiate what? His own exit. He was terrified. He'd been building his documentation for over a year at that point, and he'd come across references to an internal monitor, someone watching the network from inside. He thought if he could reach that person, he could make a deal. A pause. He couldn't have known I was already working against Crane. My position didn't allow for that kind of disclosure. So you turned him down, Seraphina said. Lena looked at her. I told him to stop reaching out through that channel, that it was dangerous, that he should sit tight. Her voice didn't waver. I told him nothing about who I actually was or what I was actually doing, and then 3 weeks later he was dead. The study was completely still. You could have protected him, Seraphina said. Maybe. Lena held her gaze. Maybe if I'd broken cover and told him the truth. Maybe if I'd moved faster. Maybe. Her voice was even, but there was something under it. Not guilt performed, but guilt integrated, the kind that has been carried long enough to become part of the load. I've thought about it every day since. That's not the same as doing something about it. No, Lena said. It isn't. Damien stood near the window with his back partly to the room, looking at the grounds in the fading afternoon light. Seraphina watched his shoulders. The surveillance, he said. Vasek's account. The shell company registered to Carr. I don't know, Lena said. Vasek. I've suspected something was off with him for about 6 months. Small things. Timing. Information that reached the wrong people before it should have. She paused. I've been building my own parallel assessment. And you didn't tell me. I wasn't certain, and She stopped. You what? I wasn't sure you'd believe me over him. He's been with you longer. The silence that followed was the specific silence of something being verified rather than decided. Tell me about the 38th recording, Lena said. Seraphina looked at her sharply. You know what's on it, Damien said. I know what should be on it if Marcus Vale was as meticulous as I think he was. She looked at the case. 18 months before he died, there was a meeting. Crane, Weybridge, and Ruiz in the same room, private. The kind of meeting where things got said that none of them would say anywhere else. She paused. I was in the building that night. Different floor. I didn't know Marcus Vale was there too. Damien moved to the case. The 38th recording was 44 minutes long. He played the first 2 minutes. The voices were unmistakable. Crane, then Weybridge, then Ruiz, in a room that sounded like the private dining rooms of expensive hotels. Speaking with the uninhibited directness of men who believe they are completely unobserved. 44 minutes of it. That's everything, Lena said quietly. That's the whole case in one file. Seraphina looked at the drive in Damien's hand. And tonight, she said, they want us to bring this to a warehouse on the harbor. They want us to bring the case, Damien said. They'll assume the original. They won't know about the copies. We'll know, Seraphina said. We'll know they're expecting us. Yes. And Vasek made his choices. Damien's voice was not cold when he said it. It was something worse. The voice of someone who had already grieved the thing they were being matter-of-fact about. Seraphina looked at the window. At the light dying over the ocean, the water going from gray to the particular dark blue of early evening, the first edge of night coming in off the horizon. I'm going tonight, she said. You're not... I'm going. She looked at him directly. They said my name. They said the case. They want me there because they want to assess what I know and whether I've had time to do anything about it. If I don't show they move before you're ready. She paused. And I'm not waiting here while other people finish what my father started. Damien looked at her for a long time. She looked back. Then we prepare, he said. Well, they had 6 hours. Lena worked the copies, 3 encrypted distributions to separate secure servers, one physical copy driven north by a man Damien called, and who arrived within 40 minutes and asked no questions. Seraphina memorized the key access codes in case everything else failed. Shay was moved to a secondary location under the supervision of someone Lena vouched for, with the specific vouching of a person who understood the cost of being wrong. At 8 o'clock, Seraphina ate something she couldn't taste and drank 2 cups of coffee that did very little and stood at the window of her room, looking at the ocean going black in the last of the light. She thought about her father at his desk late at night, the locked cabinet, the care he had taken, and the fear underneath the care, and the phone call he had made to a woman he didn't know trying to find a way out. She thought about the morning she'd found him, about the look on Celeste's face at the funeral. Not grief, something more calibrated than grief. The expression of a woman running calculations at the precise moment she should have been feeling something else. She thought about standing at the base of the staircase in a wet catering jacket saying, "I'm nobody," while 400 people watched. She was done with being nobody. At 9:15 she went downstairs. Damien was in the study. He looked at her when she came in, looked at the specific quality of how she was standing, which was different from how she'd been standing this morning, and she watched him register the difference without commenting on it. "The backup distribution is confirmed," he said. "All 3 copies are secure." "And the federal contact?" "Ready to receive everything at midnight, simultaneous with whatever happens at the harbor." He paused. "If everything happens at the harbor." "It will." "You don't have to be the one. We've done this argument," she said. He looked at her. Then he crossed to the desk and opened the lower drawer and set something on the surface between them. A compact handgun. Dark, small enough to be genuinely concealable, the kind of thing chosen for practicality rather than intimidation. "You've handled one before?" he said. "My father took me to a range twice, when I was 17. "That's not a yes." "It's not a no either." She picked it up. It was heavier than she remembered. She checked the safety the way she'd been shown years ago in a different life by a man who had thought he had more time to teach her things. "Stay behind me when we enter," Damien said. "Don't engage until I have to. Until I tell you." She looked up at him. "You can trust me," she said. "I know that." A beat. "I've known that since this morning." She wasn't sure exactly what he meant by it. She wasn't sure he could have said precisely what he meant by it. But she heard something in it that she put away carefully, for later, for the version of later where there was time. At 10:15 they got into the car. Not the gray sedan. A different vehicle. Black. Armored in the subtle way of things that didn't announce it. Lena in the passenger seat. Damien driving. Seraphina in the back with the case across her knees and the gun against her ribs, and the harbor district 35 minutes ahead in the dark. The city came up around them as they drove south. The lights of Valmera at night. The financial district. The Hotel Row. The old industrial waterfront with its rusted infrastructure and working dark. She watched it move past the window and felt something she recognized from the moments before very difficult things. A stillness that wasn't calm but was what was available instead of calm. The body's decision to stop fighting the coming thing and simply prepare to meet it. The warehouse complex off Meridian Dock was exactly what it sounded like. 4 large structures arranged around a central access road, the kind of industrial space that had been half decommissioned and half repurposed and entirely unregulated. The rain had come back. Not hard, but steady. The kind that got into everything. The dock smell was strong here, diesel and salt and old metal. One building had light in it. Damien cut the headlights 200 meters out, and they rolled in on the wet road in near darkness. He stopped the car at the edge of the access road and sat for a moment. 3 vehicles by the north entrance, Lena said. "I count..." She was using a monocular, scanning. "At least 4 visible outside. More inside." "Cranes people," Damien said. "Weighbridges," Lena said. "Different operational signature, more formal." "The judge sent his own team," Seraphina said. "He has more to lose than Crane," Damien said. "His entire career is on that recording." "And Vasek," Seraphina said. "Is he in there?" "Somewhere." She thought about what Damien had said earlier. Vasek made his choices. The specific grief in the matter-of-factness. "What exactly did he do?" she said. Damien was looking at the building. He was the one who told Crane I was building a case about 2 years ago. The leaks that set my timeline back, the source that burned 2 of my people, that was Vasek. A pause. I've known it was someone internal for about a year. I've been feeding him selective information since then. Which means tonight, what they expect to happen and what's actually going to happen are 2 different things. He looked at her in the rearview mirror. That's the only advantage we have. One question, Seraphina said. Ask. The people we're walking in there to confront, Crane, Weybridge, whoever they have, they ordered my father killed. They spent 3 years erasing me. They've been running this operation for 11 years. She paused. When this is over, when the evidence goes to federal investigators and the arrests happen, she held his gaze in the mirror. Will it actually stick? Or does money buy enough architecture that even this disappears? Damien was quiet for 3 seconds. It sticks, he said. I've been ensuring it sticks for 3 years. The distribution tonight goes to 3 separate federal contacts and 2 journalists with the specific security infrastructure to protect it. It goes simultaneously, which means no single point of suppression. He paused. It sticks. She nodded. Then let's go. The door opened. The rain came in. She stepped out onto the wet concrete of the harbor district with the case in one hand and her other hand loose at her side, and the warehouse doors lit yellow-white 40 meters ahead. Lena moved to the right, Damien to the left, slightly ahead. Seraphina walked straight. The doors opened before they reached them. 3 men came out, not threatening in their posture, the specific non-threatening stance of armed people who don't need to threaten because the numbers are in their favor. Leave the case, one of them said. Come inside. The case comes with me, Seraphina said. The man looked at her, then at Damien. Your choice, he said, and stood aside. Inside, the warehouse was enormous and half-lit by portable lights positioned to illuminate the center and leave the edges in shadow. The floor was old concrete. The smell was metal and rain and the specific chill of a large space in winter. Around the perimeter, in the shadows, shapes that were men. She counted while she walked, lost count at 11. In the center, 3 figures waited. Felix Crane she recognized from the photograph. Heavier in person, with the physical presence of a man accustomed to occupying rooms by weight rather than performance. Beside him, a man in his 60s with the specific eroded distinction of someone who had spent decades wearing the costume of integrity. Judge Weybridge. And between them, in a chair with his hands bound and his face carrying the specific damage of a conversation that had been physical at some point, Vasek looked up at them. His eyes found Damien. Damien looked at him for exactly 1 second. Crane spread his hands in the gesture of a man opening a civil negotiation. Miss Vale, he said, I appreciate you coming. I think we can resolve this quickly and cleanly if everyone is reasonable. He looked at the case. The documentation your father assembled, it was the product of a misunderstanding about the nature of our arrangement. We'd like to close the loop on it. Close the loop, she said. Return the materials, take a payment. A significant one. Enough to rebuild whatever you want to rebuild. Walk away. He paused. Your father tried to be a hero. You don't have to make the same mistake. Seraphina looked at him. She thought about the recording, her father's voice frightened in the 39th file, the careful handwriting on the index cards inside the case, the 44 minutes of Crane's own voice on the 38th file, speaking with the uninhibited directness of a man who thought no one was listening. She set the case down on the concrete floor. She straightened. My father wasn't a hero, she said. He was a man who was trying to get out quietly. You didn't give him the option. She looked at Crane steadily. I'm not trying to get out quietly. Crane's expression changed, not dramatically, just the small recalibration of a man moving from one mode to another. That's unfortunate, he said. He looked at the men in the shadows. And then 3 things happened in almost the same instant. Vasek came out of the chair. The restraints not locked, she realized, never locked. A detail that landed only as it was already happening. Lena moved from the right edge of Seraphina's vision, and from somewhere in the upper shadows of the warehouse, from a catwalk she hadn't tracked coming in, a sound that was Damien's name in a voice she... The voice from the catwalk was Vivian's. Seraphina processed it in the half-second before everything moved. The specific quality of it, stripped of all performance now, raw and cracked open in a way she had never heard from her stepsister in 24 years of knowing her. Not a threat, not a command, just her name, broken at both ends, called into the dark of a warehouse that smelled of rain and old metal, and the specific cold of places where things happen that don't get reported. Then the warehouse came apart. Vasek hit the first man before anyone had fully registered he was out of the chair. Not the Vasek she'd been reading as a potential traitor all day, but something else, something operating on a different frequency entirely, fast and controlled, and apparently unimpaired by whatever the conversation before their arrival had cost him physically. The man went down. Another came from the left shadow, and Vasek was already moving toward him. Lena had a weapon out and was moving toward the right perimeter, calling positions into a comm device clipped at her collar, and Seraphina understood with a lurch of adrenaline that there were people outside, more of Damien's people, positioned and waiting, fed information through Lena's running assessment in the car, and that what she had been watching for the past 3 hours as preparation had been something more specifically organized than she'd known. Damien was moving toward Crane. Crane was moving toward the case. Seraphina got there first. She didn't think about it. Her foot came down on the case's handle as Crane's hand reached for it, and she looked at him from a distance of about 4 feet and felt the gun against her ribs and kept her hand away from it because drawing it now was not the right move. Not with 11 armed men in the shadows, even if some of them were now engaged elsewhere. Not with the geometry of the room this uncertain. Crane looked at her foot on the case. Then he looked at her face. "Move," he said. "No." He was a big man, and he was accustomed to his size settling questions. He took one step forward, and she didn't move, and something shifted in his face. The specific recalculation of a powerful man encountering resistance that doesn't respond to the pressure he normally applies. "You understand what you're doing," he said. "I understand exactly what I'm doing. You're ending your life." "You already tried that," she said. 3 years ago. It didn't take." He reached for her. Damien hit him from the side. Not a gesture, not a warning. Full force, controlled. The movement of someone who had made the decision before he crossed the room and was simply executing it. Crane went sideways and caught himself on a support column and came back with the particular resilience of a man who had survived worse and thought that surviving worse meant he would always survive worse. He was wrong about that, but it took another 20 seconds and a specific piece of the concrete floor to fully establish it. Around them, the warehouse was noise and movement. Gunfire from the right perimeter, 2 short bursts, then silence. Shouting in the far shadows, the sound of bodies and equipment, and the specific acoustic chaos of a large metal space full of people doing violent things. Seraphina kept her foot on the case and her back to the support column nearest her and watched the room for the things coming toward her specifically. Weybridge had gone. She saw him moving toward the rear exit with the purposeful haste of a man who had spent a career ensuring he was never in the room when the consequences arrived. She looked at him and made a decision. "Lena," she said. Lena was 6 feet away, controlled, already tracking. The rear exit. Lena looked at Weybridge. 1 second of assessment. "Got him," she said, and moved. The remaining gunfire was brief. 3 more exchanges in the far shadows, then nothing. The portable lights were still running. In their flat illumination, the warehouse had the specific unreality of aftermath. Things knocked over. 2 men down on the concrete in positions that meant they wouldn't be getting up. The sound of breathing and the rain coming in through a gap somewhere high in the roof structure. Vasek was standing near the east wall with his hands at his sides and blood on his jaw from something that had happened before they arrived. He was looking at Damien with the expression of a man waiting for a verdict he's already made his peace with. Crane was on the floor. He was breathing. Damien was standing over him, and whatever had just happened between them was finished in the way that things are finished when someone has decided they're finished. Seraphina picked up the case. She looked around the warehouse. Then she looked up at the catwalk. Vivian was still there, sitting on the metal grating with her back against the railing and her knees pulled up and her face in her hands. Not hiding, not calculating, just sitting there in the wreckage of the things she had been part of, and the sound coming from behind her hands was not anything Seraphina had ever heard from her before. She found the catwalk stairs at the south wall and climbed them. Aussi, the metal grating was wet from the gap in the roof. Vivian didn't look up when Seraphina reached her. She sat with her face covered and her shoulders working in an irregular rhythm that meant she was crying in the specific way of people who have stopped trying to manage it. Seraphina stood in front of her for a moment. Then she sat down on the grating beside her, which was cold and wet and entirely uncomfortable, and set the case between her feet and waited. After a while, Vivian lowered her hands. Her face was destroyed in the way of faces that have been performing composure for years, and have finally stopped. She looked her age, which she never usually did, and she looked frightened, which Seraphina had heard in her voice on the phone this morning and was now seeing confirmed in the full version. "How long have you been up here?" Seraphina said. "An hour." Her voice was wrecked. "They brought me. Crane said—" She stopped. "He said you'd be more cooperative if there was someone you cared about." Seraphina absorbed the specific cruelty of that calculation, that Crane had looked at her life and determined that the one leverage point available was a woman who had spent 3 years systematically destroying her. "Do you know what's on this catwalk?" she said. Vivian looked at her. "What?" "Crane sent a woman who hates me as leverage against me." She paused. "Which means even he understood something you apparently never did." Vivian looked away. The warehouse below had become organized. Damien's people moving through it with the efficiency of a cleanup operation, a process that was clearly not the first of its kind. Crane was being restrained. The men who were conscious were being restrained. Someone was on a phone. "Tell me what you knew," Seraphina said. "Not what you want to tell me, what you actually knew and when." Vivian's jaw moved. "I knew something was wrong with how Dad died," she said. "I knew it within a week. There were things that didn't—" She pressed her lips together. Celeste handled everything too quickly. The estate, the legal structure. She had documents ready that should have taken months. I was 17 and I didn't understand all of it, but I understood the speed of it. "And you said nothing." "I was 17, she said again, as if this answered it. "You were 23 when I was sleeping in a one-room apartment in the Midlands," Seraphina said. Her voice was even. "You were 24 when the first outlets ran the stories about my instability. You were 25 when you confirmed to a journalist that I had a history with substances. You were 26 last night at the Laurent ballroom." She paused. "You stopped being 17 a long time ago." Vivian looked at her hands. "Crane had things on Celeste," she said. "Things that would have destroyed her. She told me, when I was 20, that if either of us made noise about Marcus, about any of it, he would use them. Not just against her, against me." A pause. "I believed her." "And so you decided the best defense was to make sure I was too discredited to be believed if I ever figured it out." The silence confirmed it. "That was your choice," Seraphina said. "Not Celeste's, yours." "I was scared." "So was my father. He spent 3 years scared and building evidence in secret and trying to find a way out, and they killed him for it." She looked at the side of Vivian's face. "I don't have anything to give you for what you did. I can't. But I need you to say it plainly. Not to me. To the people who are going to come tonight and take statements." Vivian looked at her sharply. "Federal investigators," Seraphina said. "They're receiving everything from that case at midnight. They'll want witnesses. If I talk, Crane is on the floor of this warehouse. Weybridge is being detained at the rear exit. The recordings my father made are in federal hands within the hour." She paused. "The architecture that protected them is gone. What's left is the question of where you stand in relation to what happened." Vivian looked at the case. "He really kept all of it," she said. "Every word, every transaction. 44 minutes of Crane and Weybridge and Ruiz saying the quiet parts out loud because they thought no one was listening." She paused. "Dad was always more careful than people gave him credit for." Something moved across Vivian's face at that. Complicated and private. The expression of a person sitting with a grief they have no clean right to. A grief for a man whose murder they had been too frightened to avenge and too complicit to acknowledge. I'll talk, Vivian said. Not absolution, not redemption, just a door, opening. Then come down, Seraphina said. She stood and picked up the case and went back to the stairs and didn't look to see if Vivian followed. She heard footsteps on the metal grating behind her. The federal contact arrived at 11:47. Not alone. 2 vehicles, 4 agents, the specific contained authority of people operating with both urgency and procedural precision. Damien had made the call from the warehouse floor while his people finished the cleanup, and the coordination had the quality of something planned in its current form rather than improvised, a structure built across months that tonight was simply executing. Seraphina gave them the case. She held it for one moment before she handed it over, the flat metal weight of it, the understanding of what it contained, the archive of her father's careful, frightened work across 43 months. She thought about his handwriting on the index cards, the way he breathed before important sentences. Then she gave it to the agent with both hands and let go. The arrest began within the hour. Felix Crane was taken from the warehouse in restraints, which he bore with the specific, effectless quality of a man who had spent years in rooms where people were arrested and had always been on the other side of it and had not fully updated his self-conception to account for the present moment. Weybridge, detained at the warehouse's rear exit by Lana and 2 of Damien's people, said nothing. He had the face of a man doing rapid assessment of available options and finding the inventory very sparse. Ruiz was picked up at his home at 12:30 in the morning. His wife answered the door. Seraphina heard about this afterward and thought about what it cost someone to open a door at midnight and understand in an instant that the life behind you had a different shape than you thought. Celeste was arrested at the Vale Foundation's offices at 1 a.m., where she had apparently been since receiving news of the warehouse. Whether she had gone there to destroy evidence, or simply because the office was the only place that had ever felt like hers, was a question Seraphina found she couldn't answer and eventually stopped trying to. The charges were substantial: federal conspiracy, financial crimes. In Marcus Vale's case, the specific charge that took longest to formalize but that the recordings made inarguable: facilitation of murder. That charge went to Crane and to Celeste, in different degrees, with the specific legal distinction that Seraphina understood mattered to prosecutors and to courts, and that she herself could not feel the difference between. Her father was still dead, but the word for what happened to him was now accurate, and that was not nothing. Vasek. She asked Damien about him 2 days later, in the kitchen of the estate at 7 in the morning, with coffee she could actually taste for the first time in what felt like weeks. He was a double, Damien said. He was at the window. Not Crane's fault, Weybridge's. Weybridge's people recruited him 8 years ago, before Vasek came to me. I was the assignment. He was quiet for a moment. The car accident that supposedly killed Carr. Vasek arranged it. The identification by the cousin was fabricated. Carr has been living under a different name in the Midlands for 6 months, feeding surveillance intelligence back through the shell company. Where is Carr now? In federal custody. He made the call himself, apparently. Yesterday morning. A pause. Facing accessory charges, he decided cooperation was the better math. She drank her coffee. And Vasek, she said, cooperating also, in exchange for a reduced exposure on several things that aren't connected to your father's case. Damien's voice was even. He'll serve time, a significant amount. You trusted him for 8 years. Yes. She looked at the side of his face. Are you all right? He turned from the window. The question seemed to land somewhere slightly unexpected. She watched him process it, the mild recalibration of a man not often asked that specific question in that specific way. I've been better, he said. That's the most honest thing you've said in 4 days. Almost. The ghost of the muscle memory of a smile. I've been told I'm not naturally forthcoming, he said. Whoever told you that was being generous. He looked at her. Something in his face. The gray eyes in the morning light. The specific weight of the last several days visible in the way he was holding himself. The posture of a person who has not slept properly and is not performing fine. Sit down, she said. He sat down. They drank coffee in the kitchen while the morning came in off the ocean, and Hara moved around them with the professional tact of someone who understood that the people at her table had recently been through something and needed the unremarkable normalcy of a kitchen going about its business. After a while, Seraphina said, "Lena, she's been cleared, fully. The recording your father made, her account of it held up completely against the timeline." He paused. "She's been carrying it for 3 years. The knowledge that she had that call and didn't know what he was or how to help him safely. She did what she could given what she knew. Yes. That's usually the most that's available to anyone." He looked at her. "You're more generous about it than I expected." "I've been thinking about what generosity costs," she said, "and what it doesn't cost if you do it right." She set down her cup. "She kept me alive in that warehouse. The right flank was her call, and it was the right call." A pause. "We don't get to have the outcome we had without her." Damien was quiet. "No," he said. "We don't." And the formal investigation moved across the following weeks with the specific grinding momentum of federal processes. Not fast, not clean, not satisfying in the way that the imagined version of justice tends to be. There were hearings and delays and legal architectures that had to be navigated around, and moments where it seemed possible that money would find a gap in the structure and something important would leak through. It didn't. The recordings held. The financial documentation held. 3 of the 4 additional names in Crane's network turned witness in exchange for exposure reduction, and each of them added layers that made the case more complete in ways that made it harder to attack. The journalists who received the simultaneous distribution ran with the story on the same morning as the federal announcements, which created the specific public record permanence that made suppression impossible after the fact. The Ruiz case was the cleanest. The Weybridge case was the most legally complex and twice looked like it might partially collapse, and didn't. The Crane case took the longest because Crane had the best lawyers and the most money and the deepest institutional connections, and he used all 3 of them without shame and without apparent self-reflection, which said something about him that required no editorial comment. Celeste pled out in the 4th month. Seraphina heard about it through her own lawyer, a different lawyer, a new one, someone with no connection to anyone in the network she was dismantling, and sat with the news for an afternoon before she understood how she felt about it. Not satisfied, not relieved. Something closer to the feeling of setting down something very heavy that you have been carrying for so long you forgot what your arms felt like without it. She visited her father's grave twice during those months. The second time she went alone, in the early morning, when the cemetery was empty except for the birds and the specific quality of light that belongs to very early hours. She stood at the stone and said nothing for a long time. She had been trying to find words and had not found any that were the right size for what she wanted to say. In the end, she didn't say anything. She just stood there for a while in the quiet and let him have been her father, and let that be enough. The Vale Foundation's restructuring took 6 months. The assets that had been stripped from her father's estate, the shipping company interests, the property holdings, the investment accounts, were subject to a civil recovery process that ran alongside the criminal proceedings, and it was slow and contested and at several points infuriating in the specific way of legal processes that work, but don't work at the speed that grief and justice would prefer. Seraphina worked it with the thoroughness of someone who had spent 3 years building patience she had not originally possessed. She had a lawyer and an accountant, and after the 3rd month, when it became clear the recovery was going to succeed, but the administration of success was going to require more operational capacity than she had, she hired 2 people to help her. The foundation, when it reopened under her name, was different from what it had been under Celeste. Smaller, initially. More specifically focused. The mission she chose was not abstract or board-approved sounding. It was functional. Legal and financial support for people who were trying to exit arrangements they didn't fully understand they were in, which was a description drawn with precision from her father's experience and from her own. She told Damien this over dinner, 8 months after the warehouse. Not at the estate. A restaurant. Ordinary, not the kind that existed to be seen in, the kind that existed because the food was good, and the lighting was kind, and the tables were spaced properly. It was the first time they had been somewhere that was neither his house nor the procedural locations of the past several months, and she noticed the quality of the evening differently for that. Legal and financial support, he said, for people who are in over their heads through circumstance rather than choice. Your father, my father, and others. She looked at her glass. There are more of them than you'd think. The network Crane ran, the businesses feeding into it. Most of the people running those businesses didn't fully understand what they were in until they were too far to get out cleanly. Dad was not unique. He was just the one who tried hardest to document it. Damien was quiet for a moment. The foundation needs seed capital, he said. It has some. The recovery process, it needs more than that to do what you're describing. He looked at her directly. I have resources that are difficult to attribute in ways that complicate my tax position. She looked at him. Are you trying to donate money to my foundation? I'm observing that certain financial instruments would benefit from legitimate channeling. That is the least romantic way I have ever heard anyone offer to do something genuinely good. The ghost of the smile again. Less ghost this time. More actual smile, occupying more of his face than she had seen before, changing it in a way that made him look briefly and unexpectedly like a younger version of himself. The person who had existed before the years of building something hard and necessary in a city that punished softness. You think I'm trying to be romantic, he said. I think you don't know how to do it in a language you're fluent in, so you're trying money. That's possibly accurate, she smiled. It felt strange in her face, not because she hadn't smiled in the past months. She had, occasionally, in small ways, in private moments, at things that caught her off guard. But this was different, wider, rooted in something that had been growing for longer than she'd been tracking it, some fundamental shift in the quality of her relationship with the future, which had gone from being a thing to be survived to being a thing she was beginning to construct deliberately. Yes, she said. He looked at her. Yes to the foundation? Yes to all of it, she said. The foundation, the financial instruments, the not knowing how to do this in a language you're fluent in. She held his gaze. I don't know how to do it either. We'll work it out. He was quiet for a moment. I'm not an easy person to be near, he said. I know. I have carried things for a long time that don't make me straightforward to know. Damien. She leaned forward slightly. I spent 3 years being invisible. I am not frightened of complicated. She paused. I'm actually fairly good at it by this point. He looked at her across the table. The gray eyes, the weight he'd been carrying since before she met him, the specific kind of man who had become what he was out of necessity and grief, and the particular human stubbornness of someone who decides that losing once does not mean losing forever. My sister would have liked you, he said. She held that carefully. Tell me about her, she said. Not the end, the beginning. Who she was before. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he talked. Spring came late to Valmera that year. It came the way springs come in cities that have had hard winters, tentatively, in increments, the light changing before the temperature did, the trees making decisions about leaves while the air still carried the memory of cold. The harbor smelled different. The streets had a different quality of noise. The city's particular machinery continued unchanged, because cities do not stop for what happens inside them, but the machinery ran with slightly different personnel now, and that mattered even if the city didn't know it. The Vale Foundation's first operational event was a small thing. 30 people in a rented room above an ordinary street in the financial district, most of them lawyers and financial investigators, and 2 journalists who covered white-collar crime. Seraphina spoke for 40 minutes about the services the foundation intended to provide and the specific gaps in existing support infrastructure that she was positioning it to fill. She was not nervous. She had been nervous her whole life. The specific background radiation of a person who has learned through repeated experience that visibility leads to consequence, that occupying space invites punishment, that the safest version of existence is the smallest one. She was not that person anymore. She had not arrived at not that person through triumph or through some clean arc of transformation. She had arrived there through the specific accumulation of days, hard ones and less hard ones, days in federal offices with documents, and days in a kitchen drinking coffee, and days at a grave with nothing to say, day after day of existing in the aftermath of the worst things and discovering that the aftermath did not end you, that you continued through it. That continuity itself was a kind of answer to the question the worst things asked. After the event, standing in the corridor while the room behind her cleared, she thought about the Laurent ballroom, the chandelier and the champagne and Vivienne's hand on her wrist, the 400 people watching, her own voice, barely audible, saying she was nobody. She remembered that with complete clarity, and she found that it no longer had the quality of a wound. It had become something else, a fixed point, a before, the precise location of the moment before the thing changed. Not a scar so much as a mile marker. She was somewhere else now. Damien found her in the corridor. He had come to the event without announcing it, which was characteristic, standing in the back of the room with the specific quality of someone who is present without requiring the room to acknowledge it. She had seen him there halfway through her remarks, and had not lost the thread of what she was saying, which would not have been true of her 8 months ago. He looked at her in the way he looked at her now, with the full attention of a person who has decided that someone is worth looking at and is not embarrassed about that decision. She had gotten better at receiving it without deflecting. "How did it go?" he said. "Well, I think." She considered it. 3 people stayed after who I think will be useful. One of the journalists wants to run something about the support model. She paused. And I didn't shake. You didn't shake at the warehouse either. I was shaking inside at the warehouse. So was I, he said. She looked at him. You're getting better at saying true things. It's a process. They walked out of the building together into the spring evening, which was cool and clear-edged with the particular freshness of a city after a long winter, the air carrying the harbor and something green from the parks further inland. The street was ordinary and unhurried. People moved past them in both directions without looking at them, which was its own kind of luxury. The luxury of being unremarkable, of existing in a city without being its subject. She put her hand in his. His fingers closed around it. They walked. The city moved around them the way cities do, indifferent, continuous, full of its own unrelated emergencies and ordinary happinesses, and the accumulated weight of everyone living their days inside it. Valmera in spring, the harbor somewhere to the south, the Foundation's rented office 3 blocks back, the estate on the northern coast where the ocean moved against the cliff face in its patient, permanent way. She thought about her father. She thought about him at his desk and at the shooting range and at the dinner table before everything changed. She thought about the index cards in his handwriting and the recordings, and the 44 minutes of him sitting in a restaurant with a recording device, frightened and meticulous and building something he hoped would mean something. It meant something. She thought about the morning everything began. The Laurent ballroom, the chandelier, the moment she said she was nobody, and the doors opened and the temperature changed. She had stood at the base of that staircase as the specific end of something, the last night of the version of herself that had learned to be invisible to stay safe. She was not invisible now. The city spread ahead of them in the spring evening, lit and moving and full of itself, and Seraphina Vale walked through it in plain sight, taking up her exact and appropriate amount of space, and did not look behind her. There was nothing behind her worth looking at anymore.